The 20 dogs I rescued almost killed me when the Liberty County floodwaters rose above the porch steps. You likely think you helped the world when you took in that stray last winter. But here is the thing about being a savior. Good intentions do not stop a starving animal from biting your hand. Why did I believe my love for these animals mattered more than the physical laws of a Florida hurricane? I operated an illegal animal rescue for 12 years without a single permit. You might call that charity, but the county called it a nuisance. I kept 20 dogs in wire crates behind my house because the local shelters were full. I fed them cheap corn-based kibble and gave them water from a garden hose. My neighbors complained about the noise, yet I never stopped. I felt I was the only person who cared about these discarded lives. Actually, I was just a woman with too many cages and not enough help. The clouds turned gray on Tuesday morning, and the rain fell in heavy sheets. I walked to the backyard to check the drains, but the grass already looked like a pond. The dogs paced in their pens because they hated the sound of thunder. I moved the smaller crates onto wooden pallets to keep them dry. I told myself the storm would pass by evening, but then again, I always underestimated the weather in Liberty County. I went inside and dried my hair with a towel. The rain did not stop. It hit the tin roof like a hammer. The local news announcer mentioned a flash flood warning at 4 o'clock. He told everyone in the lowlands to pack their bags and head for higher ground. I looked at my 20 dogs and realized I had no way to transport them. My old truck only held 3 crates in the bed. I decided to stay behind because I refused to leave the animals to drown in cages. Mind you, I did not have a boat or a life vest. I just had a stubborn mind. I locked the front door and waited. A deputy drove down my dirt road with his sirens blaring an hour later. He used a megaphone to tell me I needed to leave immediately. I stayed in the kitchen and kept the lights off so he would think I was already gone. I heard his tires spin in the mud as he drove away. Let's be honest, I was arrogant. I believed the drainage ditch behind the property would handle the overflow. It did not. The water pushed through the woods and onto my gravel driveway. I realized then that I was officially trapped. The gravel driveway disappeared under 6 inches of brown water within 30 minutes. I watched the mailbox lean over and sink into the muck. I tried to start my truck, but the engine sputtered and died because the exhaust pipe was submerged. I waded back to the house and felt the current pull at my ankles. The water carried branches, trash, and old tires from the neighbors' yards. I stepped onto the porch and watched the road turn into a river. There was no way out for me or the dogs. The noise from the backyard became louder than the rain. 20 dogs began to howl in a single high-pitched chord that made my ears ring. They knew the danger was close because their paws were standing in water. I ran to the back door and saw the crates swaying in the wind. The larger dogs threw their bodies against the wire mesh. They were not barking at me, they were barking at the river. I felt my heart race as I realized I had to let them out. But here is the thing, I was afraid they would turn on me. A wave of cold water pushed through the screen door of the porch. It flowed into the kitchen and soaked the bottom of my cabinets. I grabbed my heavy brass keys from the hook by the stove. I needed to unlock the outdoor pens before the water rose above the dogs' heads. I stepped back outside and the water reached my knees. It felt like ice against my skin. I struggled to maintain my balance as the current increased. I reached for the first cage handle. The Mastiff inside was a 100-pound Mastiff mix. The Mastiff lunged at the door and knocked me backward into the flood. I dropped the brass keys into the murky water. I scrambled on my hands and knees to find them, but the silt was too thick. I felt the keys slide past my fingers and disappear into the mud. I screamed, but the wind swallowed my voice. Now I had 20 locked cages and no way to open them. I stood up and felt the water reach my waist. I looked at the Mastiff's face. He was terrified. A loud snap echoed from the far end of the yard. My strongest pit bull, Buster, broke the rusted chain holding his crate shut. He surged out of the cage and swam toward the back porch. He did not look for land, he looked for the highest point. He climbed onto the roof of the shed and growled at the other animals. I watched him and realized the other animals would drown if I did not act. I went back into the kitchen to find a heavy tool. I found a meat cleaver in the drawer. I intended to chop the locks. The water inside the house rose until it reached the top of the stove. I climbed onto the sturdy oak kitchen table to keep my feet dry. I sat there with the meat cleaver in my hand and watched my furniture float away. My refrigerator tipped over with a loud splash. I saw a family of rats swim across the living room toward the curtains. I felt a deep sense of shame for my choices. I was an 85-year-old woman sitting on a table in a swamp. The lights flickered twice, and then the house went dark. The humming of the refrigerator stopped, and the only sound left was the rushing water. I held my flashlight, but the batteries were weak. The beam was a dim yellow circle that barely reached the wall. I heard the dogs splashing in the backyard, but I could no longer see them. I realized the water was still rising because the table started to shift. It felt like I was on a boat. I prayed for the sun to come up, but the sun was hours away. I grabbed my cell phone and dialed the Liberty County Sheriff's Office. I told the dispatcher my name and my address. She paused when I gave her the location. She reminded me that I had 3 outstanding citations for illegal animal hoarding. She said the rescue boats were busy with law-abiding citizens first. I felt a surge of anger in my chest. I was a human being in a life-threatening situation. Did my criminal record mean my life was worth less? I hung up the phone and cried. I redialed the number 10 times until the dispatcher stopped answering. I left voicemails describing the water level and the number of animals trapped. I told them I had a meat cleaver and I was ready to fight for my life. No one called me back. I realized I was truly alone in the dark. The water reached the edge of the tabletop. I stood up on the wood and touched the ceiling with my palms. I felt the house shake as a large log hit the exterior wall. I was running out of room. Buster jumped from the shed roof and swam into the house through the broken back door. He climbed onto the kitchen counter and bared his teeth at me. He was wet, shivering, and aggressive. Another dog, a smaller terrier, managed to squeeze through a hole in the porch and swam into the kitchen. Buster immediately attacked the smaller dog. The sound of the fight was horrific. I stood on the table and shouted, but they ignored me. I used the meat cleaver to bang on the table. The terrier disappeared under the water. I looked at the water and thought about every dog I had taken in over the years. I thought I was saving them from death, but I only brought them here to die in a kitchen. I realized that my pride was the real problem. I wanted to be the hero of the neighborhood. Instead, I was a hoarder who caused suffering. I wished I had taken the dogs to the county shelter months ago. They would have been evacuated by professionals. Now, they were drowning because of my ego. The beam of my flashlight caught a movement in the hallway. A water moccasin swam across the surface of the water toward my table. I froze and held my breath. The snake moved its head from side to side as it looked for a dry spot. It climbed onto a floating couch cushion and stayed there. I realized the flood brought more than just water into my home. It brought the entire swamp. I kept the meat cleaver ready. I was prepared to kill anything that tried to climb onto the table with me. The water swirled around the kitchen and moved the debris. I looked down and saw a glint of metal in the porcelain sink. The heavy brass keys had washed into the basin when the counter submerged. I reached into the cold water and grabbed them. I felt a sudden burst of hope. I had the keys, but the water was too deep to walk to the backyard. I had to swim to the cages. I looked at the dark water and thought about the snakes. I had to make a choice. I slipped off the table and into the chest-deep water. I pushed the front door open to let the pressure equalize. The current was so strong it nearly pulled me out of the house. I grabbed the doorframe and held on. I waded toward the back of the house while holding the keys above my head. I reached the first cage and fumbled with the lock. The water was at the dog's chin. I turned the key and the door swung open. The dog swam past me without looking back. I moved to the next one. I unlocked 18 cages in the dark. 2 dogs had already stopped moving. The survivors swam toward the oak tree in the center of the yard. They used their claws to climb on to the lower branches. I watched them disappear into the leaves. I swam back to the house and climbed onto the roof through a window. I sat on the wet shingles and watched the rain fall. I was exhausted and my clothes were torn. I looked at the backyard and saw 18 pairs of eyes glowing in the trees. We were all waiting for the end. The rain stopped just as the sun began to rise. A Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, boat appeared at the end of the road. 2 men in orange vests saw me waving from the roof. They steered the boat over my fence and pulled alongside the gutters. They helped me into the boat and then looked at the dogs in the trees. They used nets to retrieve the animals, one by one. I sat in the back of the boat and wrapped myself in a wool blanket. I did not say a word. I lost my home and my rescue that day. The county took the dogs, and they never gave them back. If this story moved you, please subscribe, like, and share this video. Do you think a person's history should determine if they receive help during a disaster? Tell me in the comments.